This week, we kind of start to kick off our deep dive into customer acquisition. It's worth mentioning that there's a lot of content that's more behind the scenes in this module. So there's case studies and other videos and things like that that are in WordPress that are behind your login. So we will certainly not get through all of that content today, but what I've tried to do and what Jen has tried to do is pull together some of the highlights around customer acquisition, the stuff that we see questions about over and over and over again. So the themes today will really revolve around some higher level concepts. We're not going to get too terribly tactical, but the goal is to get you thinking about customer acquisition, hopefully in some new ways. And just know that these are questions and topics that we talk about a lot within our own startup as we're growing. So we're going to kind of dive in and I'll walk through some of the components here. So really the two parts today, I'll spend about 20-ish, 25 minutes talking about acquisition fundamentals. And then Jen's going to go in and talk about some best practices. There's a lot of shifts that have happened in the market recently with device and privacy changes and everything else. And she'll kind of share what we're learning on the front lines with a lot of that, with that movement that's happening as well. So without further ado, we will start on some of the acquisition fundamentals and we'll get rolling. So there's going to be a few different parts to this part of the conversation today. And really, we're going to focus first on customer journey stages. And so when we're thinking about going out and acquiring customers, there's really three main bits that we have to figure out. All of us really have to figure this out, regardless of what type of company we are. The first is kind of brand level awareness. Just is the user aware that you exist or not? Which then kind of leads to acquisition, which then leads to activation. So think of this as it can be a linear state, it can be a series of loops. It's often multiple touch points, but this is generally the progression. Now, at the awareness phase, what we're really trying to do is simply get people aware of the brand. You'll see a lot of this with content marketing. A lot of what we're doing out in social channels is all about just driving some of that top of funnel mind share and building awareness for the brand. Now, when we're setting out with awareness-based campaigns, we're usually not super focused on action-based metrics yet. Like you're probably not going to measure awareness metrics against things like clicks and leads. That would be much more kind of relevant for acquisition marketing. But one thing to point out is that as you build your own awareness over time, you will start to see that your customer acquisition cost will lower. So if you're starting to reach kind of a lot of awareness with your brand and you start to see your costs drop, but you're like, I'm not really sure where this is coming from. It could be word of mouth or something else that's kicking in that is in the awareness bucket. A couple of things to think about. So awareness considerations are binary. Do people know about your brand or not? How are folks hearing about you? What is the next step you want somebody to take when they do hear about you? And some great examples here are out-of-home advertising, podcasting, thought leadership, awareness campaigns. There's a lot of emerging channels and stuff here. And I think awareness, with all the shifts that have happened in some of the acquisition and performance marketing lately, awareness is actually kind of having a moment right now. These are some of the more tactical ways you look at it. Acquisition is when we start to think about moving from awareness to actual engagement with your audience. So the things you'll probably measure here are going to be calls to actions, visits, clicks, site views, app downloads, things like that. Now, when we're thinking about acquisition, we need to think through, again, kind of this sequence that happens. So I use Miro a lot in examples. Miro posted a paid ad on Twitter. They drive users to their landing page. What are they trying to achieve when they get their user to the landing page? And trust me, they've got a very strong point of view on what they're trying to achieve. For you, what does that mean to your user or buyer journey? What is the pathway that you want that user to take? And what's your point of view on that? What do you need the user to do to move them along that journey? And finally, what value are you providing to your audience kind of at every step along the way? And when we talk about activation, what we're really talking about here, and we'll spend all of next week on activation, it's a huge, huge, broad concept. But put simply, what activation is just driving users to take the intended actions with your product that you want them to take. And again, having a strong point of view on that. Now, activation is going to be very, very active based and goal based, and it's probably going to have multiple steps. And so the two kind of starting and endpoints that we talk about a lot within GrowthU are, number one, what is your next step activation goal? Meaning, what's the next thing you want that user to do? And number two, what is the end goal that you have with that user or buyer along that journey? And so again, looking at Miro, the primary goal here is to get the user to that next step in your buyer journey. And in the case here, they're trying to get you to sign up for a free trial. And they're pretty relentless about it. So if you see their ad on Twitter and you click on it, or you see their content marketing, or somehow you got on their email list, basically they're just going to continuously prompt you to sign up for that free trial, because that's the next thing that they need to get you into, to consider you a warm lead and to continue that process of moving you through their purchase funnel. And again, they're really, really, really focused here. This is a step that's often overlooked, right? Like, these companies that grow really quickly, they've got a very well-defined, deliberate activation flow for their users, which then points to the end goal. So the end goal of activation is to basically try to get somebody to that end point of their journey, which is usually some kind of purchase. But before that, like, they get you into a free trial. If you're a SaaS company, if you're a consumer, maybe it's to download an app, maybe it's to consume some content. We talk about this as your endpoint acquisition goal, your EPAC. That's really that handoff between acquisition and activation. And again, using Miro, they're trying to get me into their paid plan. So a lot of their focus is on upselling and cross-selling, because what they really want me to do is become a subscriber. That's really, like, the reason why they put those ads up there in the first place, to drive awareness and acquisition, is so that you become a subscriber. But they can't just go direct from no awareness to subscriber. They know that they need multiple touch points. And so they've got this linear sequence and these set of loops that they've built in. So to kind of visualize this, and this is kind of a generic view of the acquisition activation loop. You start with acquisition, you hand off via this endpoint acquisition goal or EPAC metric, which is really that first step in your activation loop. You probably have a next step. You may have a third step as well, but what you're trying to do at each and every one of those steps is either move somebody to the next step or to get them to that end goal activation. And so I will challenge you to think about this for your own business. Every business has this loop, but we may not know or may not have a strong point of view on what this loop is yet. So think about that as we approach next week, when we start to get into some of the tactics on how to actually influence this. Okay, the second piece here is around acquisition metrics. And so there's some performance metrics that we generally want to look at. And so those are kind of what's happening at the top of funnel, what's happening with that endpoint acquisition goal or EPAC metric, what's the impact of that handoff from awareness and acquisition into activation, what's happening on the revenue side of the business, and finally, what's happening on the cost side of the business. And so each of our campaigns, when we think about acquisition, regardless of startups, like, there's really kind of these four main touch points that you're going to want to think through. And so just to kind of dashboard it a little bit, what we're looking at here is just some sample data around what's happening top of funnel. So what's outlined there in red is 4 different weeks of content and then a campaign total. This is looking at a Facebook and Instagram campaign. What I'm worried about at the top of funnel, or what I'm most interested in, is what's happening with my reach. How many impressions am I getting? How many clicks am I getting? And then what's the viability of the audience that I'm putting my creative in front of? Is my click-through rate high? Is it getting better? Is it really low? Do I need to improve? So this is really like the first signal in a channel that you can work with that'll tell you directionally whether or not what you've put out there is resonating. If you've got too low a reach, for example, you may need to simply just expand your audience. If you've got really strong reach, but very poor click-through rates, so like if I saw 1 or 2% click-through rate here, or 0.1%, maybe you've got a targeting problem, or your creative is not resonating, or your message is not resonating. This is all stuff that's happening up in the ad platforms. And by the way, this is true for both organic and paid campaigns. So these are the things when we talk about top of funnel, we like to look at and track. Moving down, your endpoint acquisition goal. remember, this is the transition from kind of awareness acquisition into the product metrics that will start to matter over time to you. And so what we'll look at here are ultimately apples comparisons across different types of campaigns. But for this simple example, we're looking at the number of trials that I'm getting that are being created week over week. And then what's the click to trial ratio or the session to trial ratio? So meaning of the traffic that you're sending to sign up for a trial within this Facebook group of campaigns, what does that look like? And are those metrics improving over time? So you can kind of look at this top down and then left to right, where week 4 is, is later in the game. And so from there, what you're going to start to see is you're going to start to see trends that become revenue drivers. So I get a lot of questions, and the whole team actually gets a lot of questions on, well, how do we know how to predict our revenue? Well, it's really hard to predict revenue. You need to understand what those leading indicators of what that revenue is going to be. And this is kind of the most simplistic view of that. If you know that you can effectively get trials and you understand what that trial to paid conversion looks like, chances are you can predict downstream what's going to happen with those metrics and with revenue as you go. And then again, when we go even deeper, you want to start to think about, okay, well, what is my customer acquisition cost? What is my lifetime value or LTV? How is this kind of comparing to all the other stuff that I'm working on? And you want to find those signals. So if you've got a low cost per click, but a really, really high, conversion, basically, then you might have a landing page problem. Or again, on the website, you might have a messaging problem, or maybe the page is too slow. All of these things can determine or go into this model, I should say, and you want to look at each of these individually. Now, on the organic side, I just took some screenshots of a few of our platforms. This is a view of how we'll look at kind of session to contact rate blended. So when this is HubSpot, so we look at, I look at this data every day. Where is our traffic coming from? And the line is actually the conversion rate of those sessions into us basically getting somebody to fill out a form. So our endpoint acquisition goal metric is a data capture piece. So it's an email, it's a first name, last name, company. And you can see it's a little bit spiky, but what this lets you see is, okay, paid versus organic versus direct versus email marketing, organic search, and all that's in there. So you want to take a look at this and you can plug this into a similar model. Twitter, again, you can get some great organic insights here. So I'd urge you to look at these metrics. This is going to look wildly different probably than if you're doing stuff on LinkedIn, for example. All the platforms have their own metrics. So what you want to do is start to get a sense of, okay, well, if I kind of get rid of a lot of the noise, what's the 1 or 2 metric from each of these platforms that I should take and report on a weekly basis to form that apples to apples comparison? Organic SEO, this is Google Webmaster Tools. It's their search console, which we use all the time to actually look for keywords. This is traffic that's hitting organically. So I can see, okay, well, I'm getting impressions and or clicks on these different keywords, and this is organic. And is that improving over time? Is that velocity going up? And again, when you look at things on an apples to apples basis, I'm going to want to see, for example, what's your cost per click on Twitter versus Instagram? What's that cost per action or EPAG on Instagram versus Google, right? Directionally. So like buying traffic from Google versus buying traffic on Instagram, or the effort that you have to put into organic. You want to kind of objectively and holistically think through all of those different types of metrics so you can get a sense of what's going to work and what's not going to work for you. And then you can also apply like an organic versus non-organic channel view. And just remember, some channels are going to have very, very cheap clicks, like Twitter, but really poor conversion metrics. LinkedIn actually has quite poor conversion metrics. If you advertise on LinkedIn, you don't tend to get a ton of conversions, but you'll get some volume, you get some awareness, and vice versa. So there's performance marketing channels, in general, get into this a little bit, that are just more prime for conversion focused campaigns. And then, we get asked a lot of questions about CAC, customer acquisition cost, and how should one look at that? I think you should break it down by campaign level. You should look at CAC by channel. You should look at full paid CAC, and you should probably have a blended CAC metric as well. When I update investors, I usually use a blended CAC because we're so early. It's really hard for us to kind of separate this still. But as we go and get more sophisticated, yeah, we'll break it out all these different ways. Now, when Jen and I collaborate on, say, a performance marketing campaign, we'll kind of directionally know, okay, well, this campaign was really expensive, but it got really good results. This one was expensive and didn't get results. This one was a little less expensive, but actually drove results. And we're constantly kind of going through that evaluation process of iterating on our model and with our performance marketing campaigns and channels because we're looking at the data regularly. Okay, the next section is around choosing acquisition channels. And so here, what you want to think of are these four main considerations. Number one is, can you actually find users in a given channel? Okay, because you may or may not in each channel. What's the volume from the channel? What's the cost to be in that channel? And can you win in the channel? And I'll kind of explain what each of these are as we go here. But so your ability to target and find users in a channel, I like to use this chart. So this was actually built in Miro. So this is what I call like the awareness, or I probably need a better name for it, but it's the awareness user flow right now. And I built this because probably the number one question that I get is, where should I start advertising? What channels are going to work for me? And we often don't really know. And so we try to reverse engineer this. And really it comes down to, like, if a user is aware that a problem exists, they may or may not know that there's a brand that has a solution for that problem, but they may. So if the user knows that they've got a problem, they're going to actually go search for a solution. And because of that, it's a high intent search. Search engine marketing and search engine optimization are going to probably be where you start, right? Because the customer has intentionality. They know that they've got a problem, they're aware of it, and they're seeking out a solution. If they don't know that they have a problem or don't know what solution to look for, then SEM and SEO may not be super viable for you. And a lot of us are in that boat. Now, if a user doesn't know that they've got a problem that you happen to have a solution for, it's your job to actually build awareness on that, point out that they've got a problem, point out that you've got an elegant solution. And paid social is great for this. Influencers, content marketing, all of those things are great ways to kind of point out the fact that there might actually be a problem that you've got. And that's really our job as marketers, is to do that. And then you put them through the remarketing and activation flow. But just think about that intentionality. Do your users know that they have a problem, and are they looking for you or not? And if you're lucky, you'll get a little bit of a boost if they are looking for you, and you can put your brand in front of them in social channels. It's kind of a way like we like to visualize it. Now, there's really kind of a few different ways to target: intent-based, demographic, psychographic, and then there's this whole category of other, which we're not going to have time to get fully into. But with intent-based targeting, again, the user knows that they've got a problem, they search for a solution, and they seek it out. A couple examples here. We've all done this a million times, right? You go and look for things, you find solutions. Demographic, psychographic targeting. So demographics are things like statistical, statistically based, age, gender, ethnicity, things like that. Psychographics are more interest and behavioral based, habits, values. Those are generally, both of these are generally lower intent audiences. They're still powerful, but they're generally lower intent. Here's an example of a kind of a crazy setup we had at Sandbox for demographic targeting, specifically trying to find people who were going into the military. I mean, look at this. This is on Facebook. It's crazy. Psychographic targeting here, again, you can dig into behaviors for, that small business owners take, or entrepreneurs. This is in Facebook as well. And then there's kind of this other category. So partnership marketing, referrals, affiliate marketing, word of mouth, out of home advertising, all of these scenarios, the same rule applies. The user may or may not have intent, but what you're doing is you're trying to make them aware of your brand through one of these channels. And it's worth mentioning that, we could run a whole program on partnership marketing. We have a really, really great masterclass on partnership marketing. that Shane McCarthy did. So if you're in the back end of the system, you can search for that masterclass, and it just talks about basically how Sandbox leveraged partnerships to scale like crazy. And it's a phenomenal conversation, and you'll learn a lot from that. Referrals, affiliate marketing, these are all things you can manufacture. Word of mouth is a lot harder to manufacture, but these are entire areas of focus. So, think about them, start to build your roadmap for these. But these often come kind of secondarily. Like, you kind of need to get that initial step probably through finding some of those paid and organic channels that are going to work, that are a little bit more quote unquote traditional. And finally, consideration 2 is potential volume from the channel. So at scale, a channel can be a blocker, but short term, you really just want to get started. I use this example. You can't build a 100 million ARR business on Quora alone. It's just not going to happen. Couple things to look at and worth mentioning. This is updated fairly recently. Pew Data puts out some good reports on where people hang out online. This is it. I mean, yeah, there's other websites, but the vast majority of people are on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest. TikTok is emerging. And then where do people spend all day? Still, it's Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, right? So if you're trying to get in front of people, you kind of need to be on one or many of these channels. You may not want to advertise on Facebook. You may not love advertising on Facebook, or you may not want to be on Snapchat or advertise on Snapchat, but you may just need to be there. So again, I think about this from a holistic and objective standpoint. Go where your users are. Over time, what happens is the law of shitty returns kicks in. So you start out and you're like, I'm really bad at running ads or at doing this content strategy. And then you get really good at it. And then the costs start going up because the market gets more and more saturated. So always be channel testing. That's kind of the big takeaway there. Now, how you go about marketing in kind of on these different sites and with these different platforms really depends on your business model and if you're funded or not. I would urge you to look at both paid and organic strategies and channels, and build an analysis and kind of start there. When we talk about costs, there's different channels that may or may not be a better fit for you. So some channels are going to be really easy to get started in, like Facebook and Twitter, but be mindful of the costs that come with that. Organic channels may be amazing for you, but they're going to take a lot of time to ramp up, usually to build a content strategy, build an SEO strategy, to do technical SEO. All of that stuff is just going to take you some time. And what you really want to set out to learn is like, where are you going to get the highest return on your spend, money, and on your time? And where are you most comfortable as a founder? So who's going to help on your team? Is this just you? Do you have to do it all yourself? And if so, what does that mean? Do you have people that can help around the edges with video design? Like I could start on Google SEM, but I'm not great at Facebook because I'm not creative, right? I'm just not creative. And so think about where you've got conviction and think about where you're going to delegate this work. And those might help dictate where you go. And also just know that like there's this kind of this paradox of like spend versus speed, right? How fast do you need a signal? What are your competitors doing? Do you have budget or not? Basically, how fast do you need to move? Do you have time to kind of iterate and learn and go a little bit more slowly on the SEO side? Or do you have to grow right now because you raised money, for example? Those are all going to be things that you want to think about. And the final consideration is your ability to win in a channel. And we talk about kind of cost per win. I use this example a lot. Like if your product is $40 and you, it takes $10 per lead to get a lead and you close 20% of your deals, it costs you $50 to get a $40 sale. It just doesn't work. A lot of companies raise money with upside down unit economics like that, but I wouldn't recommend it, especially for not for too long. Give yourself time though. Most of these channels can be optimized and just be ready to go wide. And then also don't try to game retention. If you've got a product with a high customer acquisition cost that drives sales, and you don't yet know what your retention is, I would be very cautious. Understand retention first, then kind of figure out the rest from there, because you're never going to game this, where if you've got high costs and low retention, you lose every time. So just be mindful of that retention. And again, we'll focus on that on week 4. Just an example of a dashboard that I use often to kind of compare different metrics in a CAC model. And on the kind of getting back to the intentionality side, there's this kind of cost and intent matrix, or again, Generally speaking, the lower intent channel, the lower the cost. The higher intent, the higher the cost is going to be. The higher intent, higher cost, probably the better results you're going to get relatively quickly, but you're going to need to spend a lot more money there too. And then again, there's this concept of what's the user behavior? Is your user making an impulse buy or a strategic buy? So if you've got a free trial or an account with a lower cost product, I think the magic number is like $29. That's what I've heard. If it's $29 or below, you'll get a lot of impulse purchases. If not, you're going to have multiple touch points. So think about that as that kind of inflection point. If you sell a product for $10, yeah, you'll probably get a lot of people that just see you once or twice and they'll kick the tires with you, versus somebody like us where our membership model is pretty expensive, relatively speaking. It's rare for us to just see somebody once and convert them right away.